Hey guys, how's it going? This is Drew here. I hope everybody's enjoying the text so far. If you haven't had a chance to read it, you can either send me a direct message on socials or find it on Amazon. Thanks again for everybody for supporting it. I hope it's just one step of many in the direction towards a long, fulfilling career in music or just making music that you always dreamed of. Anyway, I was going to start with the Chapter 1 project and sort of explain some of these elements that I talked about in the first couple chapters, in addition to showing you how I envisioned you using these files. So to begin with, I opened up the Chapter 1 Hip Hop folder, and I'm working in Logic for those of you that don't know what DAW this is. Let's hear what this sounds like, first of all. If it'll play. All right, so pretty straightforward groove. You could hear this in hip hop music. It's also, for those of you that don't know, trap music in the dance music world. Pretty rhythmically based in hip-hop music. We would describe this with some of the terms I use. It's a half-time backbeat. That means is we have a snare on every third quarter note. We are in 4/4, meaning there are 4 quarter notes per measure. The way Logic has this defined, 1 to 2, this space would be considered a measure. So each one of these bigger lines is a quarter note. So the first red line would be quarter note 1, the main downbeat, quarter 2, quarter 3, where our snare is again, and then quarter 4. All right. As I talked about in the description of the grid, this is a pretty standard setup of piano roll and the rhythmic grid. So every individual box is a 16th note. We can change this if we wanted to only see eighth notes or to see some sort of other rhythm like a triplet. But again, since this is the most common thing you're going to run into, I'm going to use this division. All right, so every box is a 16th note. Our snare is the halftime rhythm. Our kick, as I mentioned before, is on each one, with a secondary kick on some sort of offbeat. This makes for a syncopated sort of sound. All right, finally, our cymbals. Got an open 808 crash sort of sound, closed hi-hat. All right, now, essentially, I'd said that the hi-hat's role is, or the cymbals' role is usually some sort of like metronome or a faster groove, and repetition is key here in establishing some sort of like feeling. Let's listen to this as it is. All right, now I'm gonna bring this back to a more simple version, and then I'm going to edit it back down so you see what happened here. So the most basic hi-hat pattern would just be steady eighth notes. So eighth notes, again, that's going to be 2 boxes. So every 2 boxes, I'm going to put a cymbal. We can leave the crash to begin, but I'm going to fill these in. All right, now, for now, I'm just going to mute this. Those fast cymbals, which are really common in trap music, pop music nowadays, and hip-hop in general, that sound, just historically speaking, a lot of drum beats were originally in hip-hop music programmed on drum machines, such as the D.R.U, the 909, an MPC. These units had something called a roll function, which basically meant when you were playing the beat along in a sort of a looper type setup, for those of you know what looping devices are, if you held the cymbal and you had the repeat mode, note repeat on, it would basically fire rapid notes, and you could change the speed of these in the digital realm or in piano roll, we can basically write these in. So these faster cymbals, I'm just going to mute for now so we can hear what this would sound like with a steady eighth note groove. All right, we're gonna want one here, boom. All right. Now, for those of you that are working through the text, as I say, my goal for this session was for you to be able to see these various patterns, to be able to play them, and be able to manipulate them and sort of experiment with what you think, some new stuff you could create. All right, so here's the steady, most, like the simplest version of all of this stuff. Oh, I better mute this and that. All right, here we go. Now, as we listen along, the kick patterns that sort of stagger or are highlighted as being sort of out, those are our syncopated sort of supporting kicks that I talked about. All right, now I'm gonna just start muting these cymbals, and I'm gonna get something close to what I had. Now, as I said, repetition is key. That doesn't mean we need to repeat everything, but sort of ideas. Like, for instance, this first measure, I'm using a crash and then a hi-hat, but there are 2 eighth notes in a row. So a following 2 measures after I sort of I'm going to repeat the pattern, I am going to do that same thing. All right, these 2 eighth notes. Now, I had done 2 and then 1 into the second group of 2, right? Now I'm doing the same thing here, only I'm going to leave 1 out and add 1 in. This is going to be a variation, but because there are similar elements to the other time you heard this, our brains are going to link those 2 things together, and we're going to understand it. In other words, it should sound decent to us. Here we go. All right, so hopefully your creative minds are, going on overspeed now, because essentially all of the possibilities are endless. I can add back in these trill cymbals, fancy word for the note repeat ones that go super fast. To make these, it's pretty fun. These ones are pretty exact. So I basically took an eighth note, cut it in half, or made it smaller, tried to place it roughly halfway through. However, because these happen so fast, we can get some really cool sounds if we leave them out. Maybe have 3 and fit 3 in the space, roughly, of 1. Now, these aren't specific triplets, but they're triplet-esque, done just estimating. Here we go. So it creates a different sort of a roll sound. All right, I'm gonna put them back to where they were. Let's see. Oh, I added some secondary 16th notes in the other beat. Those are cool. Let's bring them back. Basically, sky's the limit. I can create a pattern that only repeats every 4 measures, every 2, every 1, every 16 measures. Really, repetition is key. As I talked about, it doesn't have to be like literal repetition, but rather repeating sort of ideas. Classical world, we call those motifs. So if you introduce a certain groove, like this first measure, the listener's already heard that. So everything they hear from there on out will, without a doubt, be somewhat based on what they heard before. So there's expectations. You're tapping your foot. So just the mere fact of if you start tapping your foot to this, maybe you're tapping your fingers on your desk, like it's 9th grade. If something completely different happens, it's going to throw you. Now that's not a bad thing. That's something we play with as being composers, but that's something we need to be aware of. And if we do throw the listener and we want them to like understand what's going on and be able to dance, let's say, we want to repeat things. Basically, the crazier something is, no matter how crazy it is, if we repeat it, it starts to sound more recognizable. That's true for a growl or some sort of actual musical note, like pitched element, or a drum beat. All right. So one word I used was a halftime backbeat. As I mentioned in the text, basically, if I take the same exact elements and I change the backbeat from a halftime backbeat rather to a standard backbeat, listen to how it will still work, but the backbeat really makes everything sound different, which is pretty interesting and kind of a cool thing to experience. So here we go. All right, so it's got a little bit more movement to it, because you could think of if a live artist was playing a beat like this and they just cut it away, what would you clap to if you're the lead singer to get a clap going? You may not realize it, but usually it's the actual backbeat. Coincidentally, snares sonically in beats are pretty replaceable with a clap. All right, so let's talk structure. Let's say we're making a beat for a rapper or a group of rappers to freestyle to. We could, say, have a trap feeling halftime backbeat on a hook and a forward or standard backbeat for the verses. Let's check that out. Let's say we start with the hook. I'm going to copy it over. So let's make a little mini hook. 4-bar. Alright. Here we go. So this would be our halftime backbeat. And our full time. At this tempo, 95 with the full time backbeat, it really has a sort of vintage, or like a vintage, a classic sort of hip-hop sound. A lot of the bigger hip-hop, those of you, just to give a timestamp, I am speaking in the end of September of 2018, currently on the radio. The last couple of years, the trap halftime backbeat and tempo of more something associated with like a dance music trap genre, 140 and 160, and really the popular tempos for artists like Future, Migos, the whole SoundCloud crew. Really, it's been popular. However, before that, in the early 2000s or 90s, this 95 BPM standard backbeat was really common, because we live in the world of the internet and every kind of music you can imagine is being made constantly. I'm sure a lot of people are doing these kind of grooves. All right, I hope that helps and gives you a better idea on how to use this project file. One final thing I want to leave you with is, as I mentioned before, fortunately, like most of these VSTs or digital instruments use a similar language. So I'm in piano roll. It looks like a keyboard on its side, but C1 is that's our kick drum, and C5 that's our snare, and C9 is the pedal hat, or I guess closing our foot pedal, since it's a drum machine and there's no actual pedal. It sounds like a closed hi-hat. But anyway, the point being, if I played or put up different drum kits here, it's going to make basically it'll still work, it'll just be different samples, so it'll work completely separately. Alright, so there's one with the Boutique SP. Let's try Fizzy Electro. How about Massive Beat? Alright, these all obviously sound different. But the point is they all sort of function the same way because we're still hearing that instrument's kick drum, that instrument's snare, clap, whatever it is, and a cymbal. Alright, cool. I hope that helps. Happy writing. And just remember, the more you do this, the easier it gets. Because most beats are programmed with this grid, there are only so many or possibilities for each of these different elements. The more you write, the more different stuff you try, the more you can just hear a beat or have a drummer or an artist try to get you to understand a beat, and you can instantly program it. So good luck to everyone, and feel free to DM me, email me if you have any questions. Cheers.